In the last video, I talked about Eugen Rosenstock-Huessy and highlighted some of the general value of his thinking, the general value of his contributions, particularly in what I think in theology. James Jordan has written a little book, Crisis, Opportunity, and the Christian Future, which is inspired by Rosenstock-Huessy, and tries to put some of Rosenstock-Hussy's ways of thinking about history into a biblical framework that I think is a very, very illuminating little book. I highly recommend that. One of the main things that Rosenstock-Huessy contributes, and one of the main concepts in his writing, something that lies behind everything that he writes, is what he calls the cross of reality. The cross of reality is a very simple diagram. It's a horizontal axis that is a time axis. One side of the time axis is the past, the other side is the future. Then there's a vertical axis, which is a spatial axis. There's an inside and an outside at either end of the spatial axis. So you come up with a four-pointed cross, and Rosenstock-Huessy argues that that is a summary of life. Human beings exist within this cross. We live our lives in the cross. And what he means by that is not just that we're temporal creatures who are coming out of a past and moving toward a future, not just spatial creatures that have a personal inside and a personal outside, a social inside and a social outside. His point is that each pole of that cross, each end of that cross, makes demands on us, and each makes legitimate demands on us. The past makes demands on us. We're supposed to honor our father and mother. We're supposed to honor whatever tradition we're in. We're supposed to honor our nation. We're supposed to honor our own personal past and not radically and not renounce where we have been. So there are demands made on us in the past, but there are equally legitimate demands that are made on us from the future. Each of us is called to a very particular personal kind of future, and we should embrace that and not try to escape the call that we have from the future. And we have to live within that tension between the responsibility to the past and responsibility to the future. And then the spatial tension adds to our distress, because we have, to put it in social terms, we have an in-group, your family, your church, your neighborhood, your people, whoever your people are. You have that in-group, and that makes legitimate demands on you. You need to be loyal to that in-group, and you don't betray that in-group. But you also have an out-group. There are people outside. There's a world elsewhere, and we're supposed to have proper interaction with them, and we can't avoid that. So we're stretched always between the out-group and the in-group. Maybe a good way to summarize practically how this works out is to think about how you have different orientations within almost any Christian congregation. Almost any Christian congregation has, and certainly any denomination, has their traditionalists, their confessionalists. We need to hold to the truth of the doctrine. We don't move the landmarks. You're going to keep to this doctrine. You have the visionaries and the innovators, the prophets, who want to break out of the old and do something new. Now, which do you follow? And Rosenstock-Huessy says you can't choose, because both of them are making legitimate demands. Within a church, you have people who cultivate community life and the internal richness of life within the congregation. But then you've got missional-minded people who are saying, we got to break out of the four walls of the church, and we need to canvass the neighborhood, and we need to do ministry outside. Which do you follow? Obviously, you can't just do one or the other. In fact, for Rosenstock-Huessy, it's an act of immaturity, and it facilitates and encourages immaturity if we try to settle in or hunker down on any one pole of the cross. Traditionalists will say, okay, to be safe, I'm going to stay here in the tradition. I'm not going to modify my confession. I'm not going to modify anything. We're going to do things the way that we've always done it. That's immature, but it's also immature to be at the other end of the temporal spectrum, the other end of the temporal axis, and say, well, we're going to destroy everything that was past. We're going to do everything new. We're going to innovate and innovate. Everything's going to be innovation. Both of those are acts of immaturity, because both of those are refusing the tension and the pain of being at the center of the cross. It's easy for churches to hunker down and just the only people that you ever interact with in a serious way are people inside the church, and you never get out. But by the same token, that's immature. But by the same token, it's immature not to cultivate that inner life and just be doing mission work. So you're inviting people into what if you don't have a cultivated inner life? So Rosenstock-Huessy says that, and when he uses the word cross, he doesn't just mean a diagram that looks like a cross. He means it's a cross. Human life is lived out at the center of those two axes. We're pulled between the past and the future, both making legitimate demands. We're pulled between the inside and the outside, both making legitimate demands, and we can't move from the center. If we move from the center, we stop growing. If we move from the center and try to relieve the pain of the center, relieve the pain of the cross, then we will never reach maturity, either as individuals or as communities. He means cross also in the literal sense of the cross of Jesus. He says this, I think it's in the Christian Future, that the cross is at the center of all his thinking about everything. The cross of Jesus is at the center of all his thinking. So what enables us to live at the center of that cross, endure the pain, go through the various deaths that we endure, death to the old, which is sometimes we have to die to the old, sometimes we have to die to our visions for the future. We have to die to the future, as Abraham did when he took Isaac up onto the mountain. We have to die to one or the other. How do we stay at the center of the cross and live out a life of maturity and growth when we have those constant, when we feel like we're being pulled into pieces? And the way we do that is by clinging to the cross of Jesus. Jesus is the one who gives us power to stay on the cross. Jesus was the true human who stretched out in all four directions and so brings them all together and enables us to live out a life of maturity on the cross of reality. As I said, Rosenstock-Huessy's work is constantly coming back to that paradigm, and it goes through all kinds of permutations. Everything is about the cross. So what I've summarized is a very simple, one very simple way of describing it. I found it enormously helpful. One of the benefits of it is that it is a very simple concept, and it's a very simple diagram, and yet it's illuminating of virtually every experience in life, both personally and corporately, and it's one of the great contributions of Rosenstock-Huessy's work.